We have had a mystery on our hands this week.
The scholars in this room are the crew of the mighty ship, the Envisioneers.
We were marooned on an island and a key part of our navigational map went missing.
Of the entire crew, we considered 4 suspects.
Today, you will hear the evidence collected against Dr. Nicholas Smart and shipwright Robert Neff.
Captain's log number 3, medicine. After the storm, Dr. Smart examined all of the crew members who were in the storm. He noticed that some of the crew members who were in the storm had fractured or sprained their limbs.
Given the amount of injuries, he had to ask that the surplus of the splints and slings that were kept in the ship's clinic to help him with the injured. We were part of Dr. Smart's examination team to help with helping those who were injured. We started with the more severely hurt. Sugar, tongue, elbow, and forearm splint. First, you bend the SAM splint so it's tightly fitting around the patient's arm. After that, you curve the edges of the SAM splint so it wraps around the patient's arm comfortably but also tightly. After that, you wrap a gauze or cloth around the patient's bony parts so it's comfortable and so the SAM splint doesn't scratch any of the patient's bony parts. Lastly, you put the SAM splint on the patient's arm and make sure it's tightly fitting and also comfortable. You wrap it with a cohesive bandage. Figure of 8 ankle splint. First, lay the splint flat on the ground. Then, put the back of the patient's heel on the splint. Use one side and fold it over the front of the patient's foot. Then, do the same with the other side. Make sure it is tight but comfortable. Last, secure it with the bandage to make sure that it doesn't get loose. And that's how you do the figure of 8 ankle splint.
We also did the collar splint. That's how we applied all of our splints.
Captain's log number 4, medicine, says this. As he was examining the crew, Dr. Smart noticed that the chief steward was looking extremely lethargic. She had very severe symptoms such as shortness of breath, wheezing, and an accelerated heart rate. Dr. Smart concluded that she had a collapsed lung. In order to help her, we needed to learn about the different types of treatments for her and which one was best for her.
I'll be showing you how to make a model lung. First, you'll need 2 balloons, a cup, a straw, some clay, and some tape. First, you will put the straw halfway into the balloon. Then you will tape the balloon onto the straw. You will make a little hole on the bottom of the cup and put the straw through. Make sure the balloon is inside the cup. Then you will put the clay around it to make sure it's sealed. After that, you'll cut off a piece or the end of one of the balloons. You put it over the opening of the cup, and that's how you make a model lung. How the model lung works. When you pull this, it acts like the diaphragm. It expands the lung inside, which is the balloon. When you pull it, it'll go through the straw, which acts like your nostril. It'll go through the straw and into the balloon, which is your lung. I will be showing you how the respiratory system works. The respiratory system is how you get air through your body. First, you breathe in and it goes down through your trachea and into your lung. After that, it'll separate the oxygen and the carbon dioxide and take the oxygen and leave the carbon dioxide. When you breathe out, the carbon dioxide goes out with that and it gets out of your system. When you breathe in through your nose, it acts like a filter and it gets some of the debris out of the air.
Lastly, I will be telling you about pneumothorax and how it works and the best treatments for it. So pneumothorax happens when air escapes from your lung. That air goes outside of the lung and stays in the area outside of the lung. That buildup of air puts pressure on the lung. Because of that pressure, the lung can't expand as much as it usually does, and that is really bad for you. So the best treatments for it
Well, first, before you do any treatment to the patient, you would have to observe them to make sure they have pneumothorax. After you know that they have pneumothorax, you have to do needle or chest tube insertion. If that insertion doesn't work, then you would need to do surgery.
They got into a terrible storm that night, and their boat got stuck on land. And then when they got up, they realized that some of their crew has gone missing, so they put together a search team with robots to search for them. The reason why they put together the robots is to search for food and help the crew. We built it with all these parts and with our screwdriver inside.
You reached the inaccessible parts of the island with the MBOTs, and we are now looking for the crew.
We programmed the MBOTs on this coding, and then we wrote all the code. And then once it was all ready, we press go, and then it starts going forward.
We successfully located them, and now we have built a truss bridge to get across the inaccessible parts of the island to humans. So then the MBOTs will travel across this, and then they will get to the inaccessible parts of the island and search for the crew members.
This is our presentation on the heart. First, my friend will talk about Captain's Log 6 and about how we dissected a calf heart. Since most of the crew have been treated, they are hard at work, though one of the crew members feels fatigued and are too tired to work. Dr. Smart says that they have problems with the cardiovascular system. He sees this as an amazing opportunity to learn about the heart. For the dissection, we were given a frozen calf heart. We identified the parts and then cut it open. We saw the different chambers of the heart and noticed that there was more meat in some areas than others. We had a lot of fun dissecting the heart and learned tons. Now my other friend will talk about the parts of the heart and what they do.
Blood is everywhere in the body. It enters the heart through the right ventricle, through the heart, into the pulmonary artery. The blood exits the heart and enters the lungs. In the lungs, it receives oxygen and discards carbon dioxide, which is why it's bright red. It exits the lungs and enters the heart through the pulmonary veins into the left atrium. Then it goes into the left ventricle, into the aorta, back into the body.
Now I will talk about heart attacks and how to prevent them. A heart attack happens when your heart is not working properly because it does not have enough blood. A cause of this is that an artery supplying your heart with blood and oxygen is blocked. Ways to prevent a heart attack are maintaining a healthy weight, eating a healthy diet, exercising daily, limiting alcohol, not smoking, managing stress, and getting enough sleep. There are also certain medication to take if you've already had a heart attack to prevent another one.
Captain's Log number 8, medicine. While heading back, Sydney Young was bit by a snake. While her memory is fuzzy, she says Neff kidnapped her, which was denied. But first we have to find the snake which bit her to give her the anti-venom and save her life. The difference between hemotoxic venom and neurotoxic venom is, neurotoxic affects the nerves, which can cause poor eyesight and or inability to speak, while hemotoxic causes blood clots, which can lead to needing an amputation for fingers. You might get a heart attack or a stroke. Here are the do's and don'ts for if you get bitten by a snake. 1 is keep the site of the bite below the heart. 2 is call 911 immediately. And 3 is remove watches or jewelry which might stop the blood flow if your body is inflamed. The don'ts are don't run away, that will increase heart rate. Don't suck the venom out with your mouth, it will have gone too far for that to work.
don't cut into the wound. It will probably have gone too far to work. Do not apply a tourniquet or tourniquet because that would stop blood flow. And keep the site of the bite, and do not have the site of the bite above the heart.
A Malayan pit viper bit Herb. We know because she said it had a flat head, was brown with black spots, and was about 3 feet long.
So as you already know, the treasure map is missing. At the scene of the crime, there's a mystery powder and there's also some blood drops. Most of the people on the crew have multiple cuts and in different places. So if we find out how high up the blood fell from, we could find out that would eliminate a lot of suspects.
To determine the height of the blood drop, we dropped fake blood from different heights and did 3 tests, added all the sizes, and divided by 3 to find the average so we could determine the height of the blood drop.
The heights were 12 inches, 30 inches, and 66 inches. We had to find the average of every height. The average for 12 inches was 10.7 millimeters, and the drops about were 12 millimeters. And here's a picture of what they look like. And you measure in millimeters because that's a good size, and you take one side of the blood drop and the other side of the blood drop. For 30 inches, it was 17 millimeters. And for 66 inches, it was 19.3 millimeters. The ones found at the scene of the crime, they averaged out to 15 millimeters. And we figured that it's closest to 30 inches, which is 17 millimeters, which means that either could have came from the person's wrist or hand, or their head if they were bending down. And we figured out that it was their head, and it was most likely shipwright Neff's.
Captain's Log 2 was about how they wanted us to discover what the mystery powder was.
4 powders that they wanted us to discover were powdered sugar, cream of tartar, cornstarch, and baking soda. To start off, the baking soda, it felt chunky, it looked chunky, it smelled very sweet, and it did react to both the vinegar and the iodine we tested. So we determined that its pH levels are neutral. Next, the cornstarch. It looked hard, it felt smooth, and it smelled silky. It did react to the vinegar and the iodine. We determined that its pH levels are also neutral. Next, the baking soda. It looked silky, it felt rough, and it smelled very scratchy. It did react to the vinegar, but however, it did not react to the iodine. We determined that its pH levels are neutral. Next, the cream of tartar. The cream of tartar, it looked fluff, it feels fluff, and it smelled sour. It didn't react to the vinegar or the iodine. So we determined that its pH levels are acid. Lastly, the mystery powder. It looked hard, it felt very smooth, and it smelled like flour. It didn't react to the vinegar or the iodine. We determined that its pH levels are neutral.
The mystery powder ended up being cornstarch. The reason why cornstarch was on the ship was because it heals sunburns.
In Captain's Log 2, we found an overturned cup at the scene of the crime. There were several fingerprints on it. Now, there are 3 types of fingerprints: whorls, loops, and arches. To find out the fingerprint, we had to dust it.
How do we dust it, you may ask? Well, the only thing they had that we could use to dust it was cocoa powder, and that was in the ship's pantry. First, you lightly put some cocoa powder over the fingerprint. Then, lightly tap off some of the excess powder. Then, brush off some more. Lastly, put a piece of tape over the fingerprint, peel it off, and place it on a piece of paper like we have done here.
After using all of the evidence that we found at the crime scene, we have found out that it was Dr. Smart and his accomplice, Robert Neff.
We have concluded this by doing our own tests, feeding the lab results back, comparing the lab results to the case profiles, comparing the fingerprints, and concluding that this fingerprint is the same as Dr. Smart's.
Though Dr. Smart denies everything, Robert Neff confessed that Dr. Smart had paid him to betray the Envisioneers.
After all the evidence our STEM group has acquired, we now know that Dr. Smart and his accomplice Robert Neff are guilty of stealing the ancient treasure map.